world didn't end with a bang. It unraveled thread by thread, each pulled by desperate hands clinging to dwindling reserves of oil. What began as tense diplomacy and trade disputes quickly escalated into something far darker. Borders hardened, alliances fractured, warships prowled the seas while satellite images revealed oil fields burning like funeral pyres. Then came the strikes. At first, they were surgical, detonations meant to intimidate, to warn. But fear is a poor counselor. And within days, the sky lit up with fire. Warheads screamed across continents, not at military bases, but at cities, at homes, at people. When the smoke finally settled and the silence returned, the world was no longer one of nations and borders. It was one of broken landscape of ash of echoes. The survivors didn't speak of victory. They spoke only of the long road ahead. In the wake of global collapse, as the last oil rigs ran dry and the skies dimmed with fallout, Earth's most powerful nations and corporations laid down their rivalries, not out of goodwill, but of necessity. Survival demanded unity, and from this fragile alliance emerged the United Colonial Nations, or UCN, an international coalition formed in desperation. With Earth's once bountiful resources exhausted and its ecosystems teetering on the edge of ruin, the UCN turned their eyes to the stars. The answer, they believed, lay beyond Earth's dying atmosphere, in the untouched minerals of distant moons, the frozen oceans of gas giants, and the promise of new worlds. Now, salvation would not come quickly. Colonization would require a fleet, vast, self-sustaining vessels capable of traversing the void and planting seeds of civilization among the stars. The blueprint was ambitious, the timeline daunting. 30 years of construction, 30 years of sacrifice, planning, and blind hope. Yet for a species on the brink, it was the only future worth building. While the United Colonial Nations spearheaded humanity's survival effort, it was clear from the beginning that public resources alone would not be enough. Colonization on an interstellar scale came with staggering costs. Costs even the UCN couldn't bear alone. And so, in the name of expedience and economic survival, they opened the stars to private investment. Under strict UCN oversight, corporations and sovereign states were permitted to fund and launch their own off-world expeditions. These ventures would remain, at least on paper, subject to UCN authority. In reality, the rules were fluid, defined by wealth, power, and influence. Among the corporate giants stepping into this new frontier, none cast a longer shadow than the Helgan Corporation. Built on energy monopolies and vast industrial refining operations, the Helgan grew fat on the bones of Earth's last century. When the call for colonization came, they were ready, with money, the firepower, and the ambition to carve out the world of their own. But the Helgan wasn't interested in mere survival. They sought dominion. To maintain order amid the growing chaos of interstellar expansion, the UCN established a strict framework for colonization. Every endeavor, be it corporate, governmental, or joint venture, required a license issued by the UCN's Colonial Oversight Bureau. These licenses came with a long list of stipulations: environmental impact protocols, resource sharing agreements, labor regulations, and above all, loyalty to Earth's centralized authority. Compliance was not optional. Those who deviated from these terms, whether by exploiting prohibited resources, violating planetary sovereignty, or engaging in unsanctioned militarization, faced severe consequences. First came fines, then economic sanctions. But when those proved ineffective, the UCN made it clear they were willing to go further. Armed intervention, while rare, was not off the table. In the void beyond Earth, UCN's reach was long, and its grip unyielding. Yet for some, the promise of untapped worlds and total independence was worth the risk. As the years passed and construction neared completion, the launch pads of Earth roared to life once more, not with the fire of war, but the engines of exodus. One by one, the colony ships departed Earth's atmosphere, vast titans of steel and promise, each carrying thousands of settlers, engineers, scientists, and security. Bound for the moons of Jupiter, the icy reaches of Saturn, and the scarred plains of Mars, these vessels retained humanity's final gamble, Diaspora into the stars born of not exploration, but of necessity. Each ship bore the markings of its sponsor. Some flew the banner of the UCN, symbols of the international cooperation and structured expansion. Others carried the colors of sovereign nations or mega corporations bound for worlds they intended to claim as their own. Among them, the Helgan convoy, black, angular, and heavily shielded, slipped into space with quiet precision. Its destination unpublicized, its intentions veiled behind layers of corporate secrecy. Earth grew quieter with each launch. The skies once filled with pollution, satellites now shimmered with the trails of outbound ships, hopeful arcs fleeing a dying world. The age of colonization had begun. Despite the triumph of launch day, the reality of colonization proved far more complex than the UCN had anticipated. Dozens of colonies now scattered across the solar system, each with its own logistical needs, environmental challenges, and cultural frictions. The administrative demands surged beyond control. The UCN is still in its infancy, and neither the infrastructure nor the personnel to manage the tidal wave of requests, disputes, and emergencies that flowed in from the stars. Communications lagged, supplies were misallocated, reports went unread, and yet the colonies kept growing, outpacing their handlers back on Earth. Swamped and overstressed, the UCN resorted to blunt tools to maintain control. Economic penalties were the first line of defense. Heavy tariffs, revoked licenses, and trade embargoes that could cripple an outpost's ability to function. But when those failed, the velvet glove came off. The UCN's military arm, hastily expanded and rebranded as the Colonial Peacekeeping Forces, became the hammer. Gunships were dispatched to quell uprisings, seize illegal mining operations, or remind would-be rebels that the reach of Earth did not end at its atmosphere. In response to the mounting strain across the colonies, the United Colonial Nations commissioned a new military branch, the UCN Defense Force. It was envisioned as a stopgap, a temporary measure to stabilize frontier settlements until proper civil governments could take root. Drawn from elite military units across Earth's remaining superpowers, the UCNDF was equipped with cutting-edge technology, next-generation exosuits, orbital deployment systems, and AI-assisted command infrastructure. Its soldiers were among the best Earth had to offer. Disciplined, multilingual, trained to operate in zero atmosphere or on hostile terrain without hesitation. In the early years, their presence brought order. Pirates were swept from asteroid belts, rogue miners were detained and reprocessed into the labor system. Quarantines were enforced, and unauthorized terraforming halted before it could compromise environmental protocols. On the surface, the UCNDF was a symbol of peace through strength, but beneath the polished veneer lay a bitter truth. The Defense Force was never meant to last. Its creation was rushed, its logistics stretched thin. And as more colonies came online, the UCN struggled to justify pouring resources into a standing military force, rather than infrastructure, horticulture, or healthcare. Whispers began to circulate about overreach, about heavy-handed crackdowns, about whether the UCNDF served the people or simply the interests of Earth. Even among the stars, temporary solutions had a way of becoming permanent, especially when backed by firepower. 10 years after the first great exodus from Earth, the long-haul colonies emerged from the void into the Alpha Centari System. It was humanity's first true step beyond Sol, a leap not just of distance, but of ambition. The system, just over 4 light-years from Earth, was chosen with purpose. Positioned between the homeworld and the more distant, still theoretical colony sites, Alpha Centauri was to become a keystone, a logistical and political hub that would bind the far reaches of human expansion together. A frontier capital, a gateway to the stars. Initial surveys confirmed what early probes had hinted at. Around Alpha Centauri B, they found a harsh, rocky world, rich in minerals and ideal for heavy industry. If settlers could withstand its unforgiving terrain and frequent tectonic unrest, around Alpha Centauri A, orbiting in the Goldilocks zone, was a jewel, a lush, Earth-like world covered in a dense green forest, fresh water seas, and a breathable atmosphere, a second cradle for humanity. The 2 worlds were designated for immediate colonization. The first, named Viridian Prime, will serve as a paradise world, a symbol of hope and renewal. The second, Proxima Terminus, was chosen for infrastructure and manufacturing. Ugly, but essential. Both were placed under direct UCN oversight, though the ink on the charters was barely dry before private interests began staking silent claims. As the first domes were raised and terraforming engines ignited, no one could yet predict just how central Alpha Centauri would become, not only to humanity's survival, but to its greatest conflicts. The dissolution of the UCN Defense Forces came not with a bang, but a scandal. Whispers of corruption had long haunted its command structure. Unaccounted resources, brutal crackdowns on civilian populations, contracts awarded to phantom suppliers. Then came the failures. Delayed responses to colony distress calls, botched peacekeeping operations, and entire supply fleets lost without explanation. For a force once hailed as humanity's finest, the fall was swift and merciless. Under mounting pressure from both the colonies and Earth's own fractured political blocs, the United Colonial Nations enacted sweeping reforms. The UCN Defense Force was officially disbanded, its name quietly erased from the official records, its leadership purged or imprisoned. In its place, a new entity was formed, the United Colonial Army. Unlike its predecessor, the UCA would be lean, professional, and answerable not to bloated oversight committees, but to a streamlined military council composed of both Earth-based and colonial representatives. It was a compromise, both of necessity and desperation. A single unified military force tasked with defending humanity's scattered domains. The UCA Navy was the first branch to come online. Composed of salvaged UCNDF warships, retooled exploration vessels, and a new generation of modular dreadnoughts, the Navy was charged with safeguarding trade routes, controlling colonized systems, projecting force where diplomacy failed. It was a fleet forged not just in steel, but in lessons, many of them written in blood. To the citizens of Earth and her colonies, the UCA represented a fresh start. To others, it was simply the same hammer painted in different colors. But either way, the message was clear. It would be order among the stars. It began with a solar flare, violent, unexpected, and far stronger than predicted. A roiling plume of stellar fire erupted from Alpha Centari A, destroying navigational arrays and blinding long-range sensors across the sector. For most vessels, the flare was a passing hazard, a momentary scramble of data and systems. But for one fleet, it was a death knell. The Akron, Triumph, Pacifica, Jericho, Seraph, and Harbinger. 6 colony ships traveling in formation en route to the far edge of Centauri System disappeared from the tracking imagers in a single burst of static. One moment they were there, beacons pulsating steadily through the dark, and the next, they were gone. Desperate attempts to re-establish contact followed, long-range hails, post-coded transmissions, drone dispatches, nothing. The last telemetry received, fractured and corrupted, painted a grim picture. Cascading system failures, reactor instability, and what one gargled voice described as uncommanded course deviation, something's pulling us, before the feed dissolved into noise. The UCA declared all hands lost. It was a blow unlike any other. Thousands of lives, years of preparation, entire colonies gone without a trace. Families mourned, flags were lowered, and the media called it the Centauri Silence. Officially, the incident was attributed to electromagnetic interference and unshielded infrastructure, an engineering oversight, nothing more. But in the quiet corners of Iridium Prime and among the engineers on Proxima Terminus, rumors began to spread. Some whispered of sabotage, others of unknown gravitational anomalies, and some, those who studied the fragments of the last message, frame by frame, claimed they heard something beneath the static. The disappearance of the Akron fleet cast a long shadow across the stars, but its impact was felt more bitterly in the UCN's ledgers. The loss of 6 colony ships didn't just mean the death of thousands, it meant financial ruin. The logistics and materials of years of preparation gone, and with Earth itself still barely afloat, there was no appetite. There was no budget. Smaller missions would consider, but projections were grim. Without overwhelming support, the odds of survival beyond Sol dropped to unacceptable levels. And so, for the first time since the founding of the UCN, desperation overruled pride. The Alpha Centauri settlement rights, the crown jewel of human expansion, were put up for a private bidding. The announcement sparked outrage. Headlines across Skull screamed betrayal. Politicians decried the move as a surrender to corporate greed. But in the back rooms and encrypted channels, the bidding war began in earnest. Mega corporations, consortiums, and entire planetary blocks entered the fray, offering everything from resource pledges to defense contracts. In the end, there could be only one winner: the Helgan Corporation. Their victory was announced with clinical precision. Exclusive right to settle, develop, and administer Alpha Centauri for a period of no less than 75 years, with profit-sharing agreements and regulatory oversight to be reviewed upon milestone completions. The agreement was barely finished before accusations started to fly. Whistleblowers claimed the bid was rigged. Leaked communications hinted at bribed officials, forged cost assessments, and pre-authorized approvals from key UCN representatives. Some point out that the Helgan's own Colonial fleet, long rumored, never confirmed, was suspiciously close to launch readiness. Others noted the involvement of the Interplanetary Banking Guild, which had extended Helgan a staggering line of credit in exchange for a 10% cut of future Colonial profits. Yet nothing was proven. Investigations stalled, records disappeared, and the UCN, battered and broke, moved on. For the public, the story became just another grim chapter in the long decline of Earth's idealism. For Helgan, it was a triumph decades in the making. The stars were theirs. The voyage to Alpha Centari was long and fraught with silent suffering. Though the Helgan Corporation's Colonial fleet boasted state-of-the-art cryo-sleep technology, what the engineers nicknamed Ice Nod chambers, no system was perfect. En route malfunctions, biological failure, and unknown stress responses caused 2% of the would-be colonists to die in their sleep, never waking to see the world they had left behind. Their losses were recorded, memorialized, and quietly buried in corporate data archives. When the fleet finally reached the first destination, a rocky mineral world orbiting Alpha Centari A, there was a flicker of hope. The ship descended into orbit, scanning the surface and initiating atmospheric sweeps. But that hope quickly gave way to harsh truths. The planet, named Helgan by corporate decree, was brutally hostile. Radiation storms flared unpredictably. The air, though technically breathable with filtration, was laced with corrosive particles. The native biosphere was barren. No flora, no fauna, no water-bearing life. It was a dead world, rich in energy resources, but devoid of sustenance or comfort. The colonists were dismayed. Helgan's leadership, ever calculating, made a strategic choice. A prefabricated orbital station was deployed to remain in orbit, a logistics platform and command center to manage long-term resource extraction. A small group of engineers and workers volunteered to remain behind, seeding the planet with automated refineries, fusion turbines, and atmospheric scrubbers. The rest of the fleet, low on supplies and morale, took a final gamble. With dwindling fuel and rations, they pushed deeper into the system, towards the second world, an emerald globe orbiting Alpha Centauri B. When they saw it, they wept. Green with thick forests, vast oceans, and a vibrant atmosphere, it was everything Helgan was not. A new Eden. In honor of the man whose ambition had led them across the stars, they named it Vekta, after Philip Vekta, CEO and principal architect of the Helgan's Corporation's Colonial ascent. The ships descended with reverence. The cities were not built, they were planted, woven into the land with towering white architecture and gleaming transit hubs. Vekta was the prize, and Helgan the engine that would fund it. But the seeds of division had already been sown. One planet of hardship, one of abundance, and only one future.